tens of millions of Americans sign up to take surveys, and there's a lot of fraud in there, dollar or two to take those surveys. And so there's a lot of fraud of people signing up 100 times or computers, AI signing up a million times. On one side, there's that challenge. On the other side, AI can pretty well detect a lot of that fraud and stuff. So that's kind of one way. It's probably pretty good for us, but AI is going to get better at faking it. So there's a sliding scale that we're going to have to keep fighting back and forth.
My name's Sabrina Romanov. Super excited today to be speaking with Dr. Adam Probolsky. He's the president of Probolsky Research, a women and Latina-owned national market and opinion research firm. Would love to let the audience know a little bit about your background.
Thanks, Sabrina. I'm a researcher. Maybe call me a scholar practitioner. I really appreciate the world of actually getting the research done, but I also really like the science behind it. I started my career in politics. Now my business is largely public policy and market research. So a little bit less of that to get elected and a little more of how is the policy going to be implemented for government. And we get to do some really fun projects for companies who are building and trying to figure out how to market.
That's awesome. Can you share any examples just to give the audience a better idea?
Here on the government and the policy side, a city that's trying to improve their connection with their public and local government and even state governments often have pretty limited discretionary funds, right? They've got to fund the police, they've got to fund the firefighters, they've got to fund the roads. Where do we put the rest of that money and make the best effect? So they try to figure that out based on the public. On the corporate side and the market research side, a finance SaaS company, you're trying to figure out how to put AI into your product, and you want to figure out if CFOs are going to accept. So all that kind of fun stuff.
Awesome. And you guys have been around for several decades. I'm really curious, when you first started out, what was it like trying to do all of this research? I imagine a lot of it manually, and then kind of adopting more technology, and now AI. So can you kind of just walk through the history of how your industry has evolved?
So I will tell you one story how it's so absurd. We would put tapes, like big computer tapes that had to go on mainframes on plane. Like we had to do a survey, and so they would put it on the plane in Texas. We'd pick it up at the airport. We'd put someone on the plane to do it and put it to a company to do a mainframe spin and spit out printed list. That actually happened. Then we would have the weird situation where they would send a fax, like a 4,000-page fax. So just that little fax paper that would kind of come out endlessly. So, I mean, look, there's situations like that. But for the most part, the real difference is 15, 20 years ago, I could only call you at dinner. That was my only option of how to get research from you. And now take my survey. And so there's really a lot more flexibility. So the one thing I do get annoyed by is the people who say, oh, it's so much harder to get people to take a survey. It's so much harder to get people to get involved. And it's not true. I can talk to you when you're walking your dog, when you're driving to work, or when you're sitting at the pool top.
And so it sounds like with technology, you had increasing access to be able to reach people and get their opinion across all different media. And so how does AI play a role in that? And for those listening who are not familiar with the term synthetic data, could you also talk a little bit about that to provide context?
Sure. Yeah, we are very much in the human business, what do people think, regardless of what the scenario we're researching. And it's really valuable to have a human understanding of what people want to buy, what they're interested in, what they care about, what their aspirations are. And so we think that will always be valuable, but we're also pretty conscious of the fact that that's pretty expensive. And there's a downward pressure on the market research business to figure out accommodate lower costs. And if we don't do something about it, it's going to happen to us. If you're young, you're under 30, you probably wouldn't even consider hiring a market research person. You're just going to go, ask Reddit and ask AI.
Let's start on
the answers right. Yeah. So synthetic data at the simplest form is just kind of created databases of people and data points. So if I'm surveying, let's say, a resident or a voter of a community, I have a ton of data, right? Every address you've ever had, I know all that stuff. It's ridiculous. But those data points are really valuable in assessing not just your answers, but kind of the meaning behind those answers. So synthetic data is just a replication of that, a creation of, say, taking consumer data and creating a synthetic set of that. I mean, we could do it right now. We could go into pitch your AI and say, make me a data set of 100 people. These are going to be Texans who are over 50, who are Costco members, right? And you give it some other data points and it'll fill it out. right? It'll Bill Smith and Susie Jane and Barry Wong, and it'll be in there, and there's going to be some stereotypical stuff in it.
Yeah, like, that would be my next question. Like, how do you ensure it's reflective of reality? Like, I'm curious what that process.
We kind of give a very simple idea of it. There's a much more sophisticated way of doing it. You can kind of take that, let's say, a data set of 100,000 consumer real data, and had trained AI on that. Young people could literally go in and do that 100-person data set and just interrogate it and say, okay, now we're going to have a focus group with 10 of them and put this pricing model in front of them and see what they have to say about it. I love data regardless of the form. I would never stand up to that from a scientific standpoint and say that's valuable from a scientific standpoint, but it's interesting and it may help you ID, okay, this is the 100 questions we need to ask in our research. But now that I've ID'd it with this, interrogation of this, fake data set, maybe I would actually have to ask 9 or 10 questions because I think I've dispensed with some of that other big idea stuff. So, I mean, I don't like it. I hate it, right? Because I love this. Given what I have today, it's working. The system we have has worked really well for me, people that look like me. And so I love it. But I'm really conscious of the fact that not just technology, but the world is changing. And this system that's benefited people like me dramatically is changing, and we've got to account.
Yeah, it's really interesting. You mentioned the concept of using that synthetic data and the answers you get to help narrow down your set of questions for when you actually go put together a human focus group. Because I've read about similar approaches, for example, in fields like economics, where it's very expensive to put together a group of people and survey them or run an experiment. And so I'm reading more and more research papers where they're using synthetic data based off of a real data set, but querying that synthetic data, those personas in there, in order to figure out how they should structure their hypothesis for the final experiment, which is expensive and you can only do it a few times. But it's helping that ideation process of like, oh yeah, we didn't catch this edge case, or like maybe we should account for this situation, or we should change your hypothesis in this way based on like the preliminary data that we're gathering from the synthetic personas.
Yeah, it's perfectly true. It's the scenario I think we're going to see more and more. I mean, the dramatic change we're going to see in the market research world is there's a lot of jobs that are going to be lost in this industry. I don't think you're not going to have the chance to make it up and find another place in the world. And there's a lot of data science that happens here in market research, and there's a lot of data science that happen in the rest of the world. So if you can't do it in market research, you can go somewhere else and do it. But those opportunities are really going to change our business dramatically. And I saw it 2 years ago or more, and we started planning for it. But there's going to be a lot of people who didn't plan for it, and that's going to be a little bit scary for them.
And what would be your advice to folks in that situation who are realizing AI is here to stay? It is going to have a major impact, and especially maybe on my job or industry.
Yeah, I mean, it's first of all, it's strong adoption if you have the capability to do it, but not in the do it because like it's just happening and try to keep making money. Do it if it's natural to your business. In mine, we're somewhat insulated because the work we do for government is not going to be largely replaced by AI for a while because they're not going to accept synthetic data for the kind of work we do. So jump in the pool with us in public policy if you want to. But in the corporate side and the market research side, things like pricing models, things like packaging, look and feel, and things like that, you really do have the opportunity to inject computer science, data science, AI into it and just embrace it. I've seen a lot of your work, and I don't think you were the expert you are today 5 years ago. And some of the things you didn't know too. So it's not like this takes 10 years or a PhD to get this stuff. Dive in and start figuring it out today. And next week, you might have a little more knowledge.
Yeah, and the space is moving so rapidly. Every single week I find out about things and I'm like, I got to play with that. And then it goes to the back burner. Then next week there's another thing that I got to play with. The space moves rapidly, and I think that might be why it's kind of intimidating where to start. And so I do focus a lot of my educational content. But yeah, that's a really great point. And I'd love to learn a little bit about, you mentioned difference in responses between public versus corporate. Are corporate folks open to synthetic data? Do they have objections, concerns? Like, I guess, what is the current litmus test of their thought around it?
There's other factors there, but essentially, if you are under a certain age, the same thing happens, by the way, in politics. So if you started in politics decades ago and you have a trust level in how polling works, there's no such thing as a national election, which is why national polls suck. on a more regional and local basis, it's very accurate. And so I have a lot of confidence that, and the consultants that I've worked with for decades do also. And they're always going to want that real time, real person polling data. But younger consultants, if you walk like a precinct for Bernie and you've got a cell phone, you're a political consultant today. So you really don't have respect necessarily for the old school style of research. And the same thing happens in corporate. If you wear a suit every day and you work for Procter and Gamble, you expect to see the people in the room holding the product and telling you whether it should be green or blue. If you're younger and you wear a t-shirt and jeans every day and you work for a SaaS company or some other startup, you have zero interest in being in that room or watching from the independent. You have no context for that. So if somebody shows up to you with a report, whether it was synthetic or based on 1,000 interviews, you may not really have a concern over the difference between that if you have confidence that the data is going to be helpful. So that's, I think, where we are. I think it's more of an age and kind of time in position than anything else.
Gotcha. And I'm super curious, have you done those experiments side by side, like done a 1,000 person survey and then compared it with the results from like 1,000 synthetic people? Like, what were some interesting findings?
Yeah, 100%. And the good thing about Americans is we are very predictable when it comes to all those stereotypical things. You're a conservative and you're going to say this. You're a mom and you're going to say this. Like, we kind of have some of those expectations. Women are going to be more environmentally conscious and care more about, what their kids are putting in their bodies. We're more frivolous with that, guys are. And men are going to have a little more interest in those more rugged things, right? But we are pretty predictable. So on a broad level, a national level, synthetic data actually can be very useful. If there's not a lot of emotion involved, it can be really, really useful. But it breaks down very, very quickly when you try to ask about aspirational things, like things that haven't necessarily been contemplated yet, and where people want to go with their community, with their finances, and where they want their kids to be in years. Like those aspirational things, like fail really quickly with
And
AI.
if your survey for those people had previously included things about their hopes and dreams, why can't it be represented in synthetic data?
I'm not the AI scientist,
Yeah.
so I'm not sure, but it's not that good at ideating that next thing. It can come up. You ask it to say, like, give me 5 new technologies that we can't even contemplate today. It'll give you, the spacecrafts that can go from here to Mars in a week and a half, but it doesn't do good at matching human emotion with aspiration. It can't figure that out yet.
That's really interesting. That's one of the key challenges. Are there any other areas in the synthetic data space that you're excited about in terms of what problem areas people are focusing on and improving upon?
I don't know if I'm excited about it, but there's a problem or challenge in research today where a lot of work is done on kind of broader panels where there's tens of millions of Americans sign up to take surveys, and there's a lot of fraud in there because they may get 10 cents or $1 or $2 to take those surveys. And so there's a lot of fraud of people signing up 100 times or computers, AI signing up 1,000,000 times. And so on one side, there's that challenge. On the other side, AI can pretty well detect a lot of that fraud and stuff. So that's kind of one way that it's probably pretty good for us, but AI is going to get better at faking it. So there's a sliding scale there that we're going to have to keep fighting back and forth.
That's so interesting. It parallels like a lot of the concerns in the education space, right? People using AI to cheat and then using AI to detect the cheating. And so,
Yeah.
but you're saying it works pretty reliably. Like AI is actually able to detect if an AI bot took the survey.
The thing is that I don't think AI detectors are very good at like detecting in an essay, let's say. I mean, if there's repetitive words, yes. But for the most part, I think there's a lot of students who are getting fooled by those kind of systems.
Yeah, it's a hot topic right now for sure.
So you're doing a survey about, a new car and their responses just aren't on point. And AI can quickly look at that. And then it kicks it to us. We eyeball it. We're like, oh yeah, there's a theme here. And every one of these are unique. And there's also, we also have the benefit of IP addresses and other things. You can match IP with something that looks a little bit off and all of a sudden we can put.
That's really cool. Wow. Earlier you mentioned one of the standard approaches today is to do Reddit-based research, and I'm seeing a flock of startups emerging around that. But when would you suggest an approach like yours, like going to your firm and doing synthetic data research, like versus using something like Reddit for research? Or do you combine them? So I'm curious, like what the options are, let's say if you're starting a brand new business.
From an offering standpoint, we don't offer synthetic data research. I don't have an offering yet, just because I don't have that full confidence in it. I'm interested in it. I think it's cool. I'm still a little bit unsure. So we're going to offer higher ticket. So to go to a proper market research firm, it's really whether you think that that's valuable. And if you have a budget of, you can hire for $5,000 and you can spend millions, right? So if you have a real budget, we're working right now with a client, and company is creating a new client, and it's for high-end household. And they're not going to get the data they're looking for from that unique subset of people that's really going to help them price their product. And also, there's a value here in selling their concept in their pitch deck to investors. So if you're going to investors and you're showing up with something you created in Claude from a market research standpoint, I'm pretty sure they're going to look suspect at that. And that's part of the picture of how they decide whether to invest in you. But that's probably not the right thing to show up with, is his AI synthetic data that you created yourself. So that's when you hire a market researcher. But I can totally see if you got the $0 startup and you're just kind of trying to sell your campaign, your tool, your consulting service, or something like that, you're just going to start asking questions. I would just start interrogating, whatever you can.
So it sounds like if your audience or demographic is really hard to reach, or if you need to raise a bunch of capital, that makes the most sense to invest in a lot of market research upfront. Cool. So outside of synthetic data, how else are you using AI?
There's a lot of qualitative work in research, even in survey data. And those words, sentences, paragraphs are always a big challenge from a research perspective to categorize first, because everybody wants to know, okay, out of the 1,000 responses, what really rises to the top? So we have to categorize it, which is a little bit subjective. Somebody mentions roads, traffic, streets, so that all go into one category. So that typically, let's say, has. Now we can segment it a little bit more because AI can give us a little more perspective on those different buckets, and it can be done much quicker. Again, we always have a human intervention moment when it comes to that sort of thing, but it's harder and harder when we have, let's say, an agency we're working for where we have 30,000 responses in the survey.
Wow.
And there's like 42 open-ended questions. We've been using a machine learning on that process for half a dozen years. It's just getting better and better, and less technical people have to be involved in that. And more of our standard run-of-the-mill research analysts who now do much more, I call it interrogation or querying, and work that process to the point where it's deliverable to a client, rather than having a data scientist kind of call through the machine learning process and get it done. So it's taking a timeline of, let's say, a week, and taking it down to few days or even less. There's a couple of inflection points when it comes to research, opinion research and market research anyway, like writing the questionnaire or the instrument, the discussion guide, let's say. So you can give yourself a head start, just like all of us do with an essay, with the memo, with a op-ed or trying to get published in the Wall Street Journal. We all start in Claude for writing, and it gives us a full outline, and then we know, okay, that's ridiculous, and we start marking it up and we play with it. So the same thing goes with any of the research starting points we have. We're going to give it all the context and say, start me out with some questions, and we have our standard bank of questions, and everything's custom. So it's just that great starting point. It's like, sometimes it's like, oh yeah, that question we asked 2 years ago, because the AI is trained on it, reminds us that's an appropriate question here. And so it's a good starting place. Let's say it takes it from days to hours. And then the same thing on the back end, the reporting. Again, for about 6 years, 5-6 years, we've had the ability to take a presentation deck. And we've been able to take that from, again, days where we had offshoring to do it. And then we took it in-house with the technology, and take it from days to hours. And now we can literally almost do it in minutes, where AI writes the headline. Human intervention is 30 to 50 minutes rather than 3 to 5. So all those inflection points of the big meaty stuff our research analysts do can not be eliminated, but it is absolutely condensed.
And in terms of the tool set you're using, are you finding Claude and ChatGPT sufficient, or have you had to build out like your own data ingestion or RAG type of system to help with some of these efforts?
Yeah, so we've definitely built our own systems on the reporting side on a moment basis where, let's say we get some data back and I've got to have a conversation with a client 5 minutes later. Yeah, any off-the-shelf AI can give me a quick feel for especially the qualitative data.
Mhm.
So we can start the conversation. By the time we're an hour into that conversation, my staff can deliver me the report. But like if my client wants to have a conversation right away, we can start and we can have some deflection points at the very least from llama to whatever. You can choose it and it'll start giving you.
Awesome. Yeah. And any tips out there for folks who are trying to use AI similarly in the sense of like they have a ton of data that they're trying to analyze, but it can be kind of difficult to figure out like how to categorize it, what are good questions to ask, like just any general tips and tricks that you can share?
Yeah, I mean, it's big data sets and off the shelf models are not so easy to manage. But you're not going to give ChatGPT a data set of 1,000 responses and 100 data points and get a chart from it really probably because it's just too big. So break it down to chunks. That's, an easy one. So you can give it 100 random responses and 20 fields, the most important ones, and start playing with it. And there's specific software out there that does that, like analyzes survey data or analyzes, a database, and they may be better at it. But breaking it down into chunks until we get to the point where it's going to be irrelevant and your $20 a month plan is going to let you do whatever you. Right now, you've got to break it down.
Yeah, that makes sense. The context window is limited.
I'm an evangelist for the real work of talking to real people. And I don't want anyone to think I'm not, in my industry, I'd be a pariah if I said anything otherwise, but I'd also not be an entrepreneur. I wouldn't be someone who is forward thinking to think that this isn't happening to us. And then we either get to have it happen to us and go off into the, walk off into the distance or somewhat embrace it and tell people the truth, right? This is good, this is bad, and accept some of it as the product gets better.
That's lead me to another question, like among market and opinion research firms, what is the attitude towards AI? Are they embracing it? Or are they still kind of like closed up? I know you talked about the age differential earlier, but just as an industry, are you noticing the opinion shift when it comes to AI?
The big market research firms, which are oftentimes attached to big PR and marketing firms, they're of course embracing it because they look at headcount and say, okay, I've got 1,000. Amazing if I can get 200. Let's get rid of all these people. They're obviously very bottom line driven. So I'm sure they're very much working on implementing 1,000 different ways to implement AI. For medium-sized firms like ours, we're embracing it in the right ways to do it, making sure that human interaction is always in the process. So I think we're maybe a little less trusting than maybe a bigger company who has a little more capacity for error. And then the smaller firms, I think, probably aren't. If you're a 1-2 person practitioner, probably just don't have the capability, the technological capability to implement it in your shop. And those people will either be gobbled up or they'll have a 2 to 5 year runway here and that's fine. I mean, they'll figure out what's next or not. But that's, I think size is probably the more predictor of implementing an AI.
That's actually pretty interesting. So not necessarily intuitive. So like the bigger firms, because they want to be more profitable, are the ones adopting it fastest rather than being hesitant to it, even though it introduces a lot of changes. Right. Overall, though, it is kind of concerning, like the downward pricing pressure. Could you expand on kind of how you envision the industry looking in 5 to 10 years?
I'll bring in a topic that we didn't expect to talk about, but offshoring is huge. If you've got more than 3 people working for you in the research business, and if you're not hiring staff in other countries for 10 or 20% of American staff costs, you're losing profits and opportunities, but you're also being priced out of the market. So, I mean, we have staff in 3 different countries, and it's amazing to hire professionals, not customer service people, not virtual assistants. We have professionals in all the world. So that's one big factor that is happening in consulting with us across the board, but very much in the data-centric part of market research and opinion research. So that's accommodating a downward pressure in cost that is brought on by synthetic data and restricting and constricting of the market. Like if you listen to people who are in this business, they talk about it so much differently than younger people in business. And so that is just the reality of constricting of the business comes from a less of an appreciation for it and the greater adoption of technology. You could talk about from a business standpoint, a bottom line standpoint, or a top line standpoint, I guess, you can see tens of percentage points off the amount of business that firms like ours could be getting over the course of the next, let's say, 2 to 5 years. But from a business owner standpoint, with the opportunity of adopting some of that and offshoring, we can keep our profit margin.
Mhm.
pretty well. It's just a decent amount of those staff members are going to either have to be really innovative, really energetic, and really creative, or they are not going to be.
And it's interesting because I don't think that this space will ever go away. Like, if anything, data becomes noisier because it's so much easier to get someone's opinion. Now you're like flooded with data and it's hard to kind of separate the signal from the noise. And what you talked about earlier, the aspirational piece, the emotional piece that is driving human behavior, that sounds difficult to capture with synthetic data. And so, like, the convergence of increasingly massive amounts of data, the ease of accessing that data makes the problem more acute. Like, how do you figure out what people really want and that they're not just saying they want? Because it's easy to say maybe you want it, but like, how do you kind of dig multiple layers beneath that answer?
Yeah, I think the great thing for us is that emotion is hard to predict. And this is not going to come as a surprise because you see it every day in every walk of life. We are much, much, much more emotional about everything in our world today. That AI definitely can't predict that. I mean, the absurdity of the emotions that we experience, it should not be predicted by a computer.
Awesome. Yeah. Any other closing thoughts before we wrap up?
No, thanks for the forum to talk about this because it's a lot of fun and it's happening. So we should talk more about it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Awesome. Thank you so much for joining.